and go. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the third of our Lunch and Learn webinars designed to spark conversations about a variety of residential and commercial zoning topics. This webinar is a series of part of Code Create Vienna, the process of updating the town's zoning and subdivision codes. My name is Kelly O'Brien, and I'm the Principal Planner for the Department of Planning and Zoning. I'm joined today by Planner Andrea West. Andrea will be giving the presentation today, and I will be moderating the question and answer portion at the end. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the Q&A feature during the presentation. However, all questions will be held until the end of the presentation. If you're watching this recording after the webinar has ended, please email your questions to codecreate@viennava.gov, and we'll be happy to respond. And that email will be provided at the end of the PowerPoint as well. With that, I will turn it over to Andrea to tell us, what's your sign?
Thank you, Kelly. So today we are going to talk about the who, what, where, when, and why of signs. Not in that particular order, but and this is all going to be in the context of how signs are regulated by the zoning code, specifically the Town of Vienna zoning code. Sign regulations vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, so we do have a lot of things that are worth pointing out if you're someone who does do signs, if you're either a business who has worked with another jurisdiction or a contractor who's worked with another jurisdiction. It's not going to be the same across the board. So first is start with what our zoning code defines as a sign. And if you read this definition, I won't read it out loud, but some of the highlights are, object, letter, figure, design, symbol, artistic display, trademark, and flag. And this I have highlighted because we can start off right away and say something that is excluded from the regulation of signs is state, local, and federal flags. So our United States flag is treated differently than the flag on the left, which is a commercial flag. So signs. I think when people talk about signs, they hear, it can mean a number of things. And again, that definition is very broad, but we've started to carve out exceptions. So we're going to get into why we regulate signs. So these are sections taken from our intent section of Article 19, which is part of Chapter 18, which is the zoning code of the Town of Vienna. So the intent is to control the signs within the town, ensure that they are appropriate, can keep with the appearance in the surrounding environment, and protect the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. That is a common theme through zoning. It's character and to protect general health and safety and welfare. So we also have another control on signs that I'm going to talk about later, and that is design review through our Board of Architectural Review. And then there's a second section in the intent that I thought was important to talk about, is that the general premise for control of signs is legibility, effective display of information, and safety. So that is something, again, that as we go through our code and we talk a little bit about what type of signs, that is the underlying intent of these ordinances and controls. So we have a couple types of signs that are not regulated by zoning. You see some here today. We already talked about the municipal, state, and local flag and federal flags. And then our code does have some exemptions that when we start to look at the size of signs, while something appears to be a sign, it might not fall under our zoning code regulations. So there's two different types of zoning categories for signs: permanent signs and temporary signs. Majority of what we talk about today is going to be permanent signage, but if you have questions about temporary signage or determining if something is a permanent sign or a temporary signage, I encourage you to ask at the end of the presentation or submit a question in advance and we can answer that question. And you can always contact staff. I will say as we go through this, our sign code has a lot of layers to it. There are parts of it that are conditional on other things. So this is not an all-inclusive presentation by any means. So in your situation, you might want to reach out to staff, submit an application with the understanding that if it doesn't meet one of our regulations or one of these, we will reply to you with those comments in the process, which we'll talk about later. So our zoning code lists out several sign types. And again, these are the permanent signs I'm going to start with. And I'm going through them alphabetically as they are in the definition section of Article 19. It's a little bit of a unique section of our zoning code in that it has its own definitions. So these are not going to be in the beginning of the zoning code, but actually in Article 19. So awning or canopy signs. This is not the only application of an awning or a canopy sign, but these are probably the more traditional versions of it that we would see throughout town. Awnings can be made of a harder plastic, canvas materials, and we do actually allow the signage to also be on the slope of the awning. So if you, these two happen to be on that front portion, but it could be on the slope of the awning. Freestanding signs. So these are three different freestanding signs. In this case, it's not about how the sign is used, the message, it's that it's not attached to a building. So there's some sort of foundation, pole, braces, or structure that's attached directly into the ground. And then our zoning code also defines monument signs and then puts some restrictions on what's defined as a monument sign and where they can be located. So it's no taller than 6 feet, and it also has to be located in a landscaped area. So I purposely use this Amazon fulfillment sign from the previous slide again, because it's a freestanding sign, but in addition, it is a monument sign. So wall signs. We have probably the majority of our signs around town are of a wall sign type because of the way that development is built out. So we have a couple different examples here. It can be blade signs, which we'll talk about later. Our zoning code doesn't have a lot of situations where those are actually allowed at this time, but it's worth saying it is affixed to the building. So it would be a wall sign and have to meet all of the wall sign requirements. This is next one where it says total car care. That is a sign cabinet. Those are permitted. And then the channel letters. So these are probably the three most common we see. This is not meant to be all inclusive of the different types of signs that there are, or you know, that's a constantly changing technology, and we see a lot of different things that come through our office. So, but there are some controls in the definitions in Article 19 of the size, how things are configured against, you know, how far things protrude from the building, such as that. So we have a section in our sign code that talks about what is exempt. And by exempt, they mean exempt from permit. And that also means that these signs are exempt from the design control district review. So the Board of Architectural Review. So these are a few examples of portions of that code that are called out. Again, we've got the signs that are typically smaller than 1 by 5 square feet. The ring sign is a typical sign that you might see in a residential district. The no parking control sign, these are frequently used on private property. They can be branded to the business. We see a lot of banks have, you know, parking for customer only. As long as they are below 1 and 1.5 square feet, and they are prohibited to install those. Window signs, temporary window signs specifically, are not are exempt from review, as are certain real estate signs. So this is the few pieces I have pulled that I just talked about. Again, it's something where this is not an all-inclusive explanation of what is exempt. So please feel free to reach out to staff and ask specific questions for a specific situation. So prohibited signs. This is going to touch a little bit on both the temporary and permanent signs. Prohibited signs in the town of Vienna. These are probably some of our most commonly asked questions and possibly used. The feather flag signs are prohibited in the town of Vienna. Pennants and other attention-getting devices, and moving signs. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. In addition, we have roof signs. Again, there's a very specific definition in our zoning code about what's a roof sign. And it's something that we would look at and make sure it didn't conflict with anything there. But we can talk about that if there's a specific case. Exposed tubing. So in this case, we have a White Castle location that is using exposed tubing mixed with a internally illuminated sign. We would not be allowed to approve this in the town of Vienna. An exception to this is signs that fall under the exempt category that are below 1 1/2 square feet. Most commonly, we see them as the open signs at businesses. As long as they are not flashing, those are allowed. And billboards, those are also prohibited. So here's a few of those. The moving and rotating signs is what is frequently prohibits us from being able to allow some of the temporary signage because they are meant to move with the wind. And you'll see the definitions at the bottom of the screen here. It's worth noting, underneath number 6 here in the center, it says, unless provided by the zoning administrator for not more than 30 days, we do currently allow banners. That was a zoning administrator determination. Banners are intended to be affixed and not move with the wind. So we have been able to allow them by that determination. I believe it was made in the early 2000s. And so that's something we'll talk a little bit more about later, excuse me. So you know that you need a sign permit because we've talked about what's prohibited and what's excluded and what's exempt from permitting. So Article 19 states that gives you the following conditions on when and how you need a sign permit. So except for an exempt sign, and a permit is required to erect, alter in any major respect, including changing colors or move any sign. This is important. Some signs and a lot of signs are made where the content of that sign can be changed without changing the structure. In the town of Vienna, that requires a sign permit. That requires review by the town of Vienna, the Board of Architectural Review, and a zoning review. The building permit review is done through Fairfax County, which we'll talk about a little bit more here in a moment, and that they would make that determination if you needed a building permit. But you will need a sign review and a sign permit. So the sign review process, you're going to start with the town of Vienna. We do the zoning review first. That makes sure that signs that go forward through the design review process and to Fairfax County meet our code. We don't want to waste anybody's time by sending signs through the design review process if they can't be installed anyway. So next would be the Board of Architectural Review. They review, again, any change of sign content, color, location, size, design, anything, any alterations, any exterior modifications in commercial districts are reviewed by our Board of Architectural Review. And finally, Fairfax County issues the final electrical and any other building permits required for the installation of a sign. And this includes the structural, anything of that nature. So what are the zoning requirements for signs? What are we looking for? First, we start with what zoning district is the project within? Residential or commercial. Our zoning code currently breaks up our sign regulations by the broader zoning categories. Commercial and industrial, residential, and then industrial, and vice versa. So what type of sign are you proposing to install? So as we talked about those sign types before, those are coming back now because a lot of them, as you saw in the definitions, and then in the text of the code, they also have the different requirements as far as location, size, etc. So, and then sign location. Where the sign is going on the building or property matters also. There are controls on sign setbacks, the number of signs that you can have based on the location of the sign size based on the location of the size. For example, wall signs. If you are eligible to have a wall sign on the side or rear of the property, there are conditions that allow that. There are limits on the size of that sign and limits on how far it can be set back from the street. In most cases, the only signs that a business is eligible for in a commercial district is on their principal or their primary facade. So we'll use example, many of our commercial properties face Maple Avenue, hence their signs are facing Maple Avenue because they are not eligible for any other side or rear signs based on what's in the zoning code. I'm not going to get too further into those today because could be a whole nother half-hour presentation. So, and then size. So as we talked about, the first three criteria put limits on the size: the zoning district, the type of sign, the sign location. So I've got some examples in the next couple slides here. So we have a wall sign, and we're gonna use our examples based on signs that are permitted in the commercial and industrial zones. This is our most common request, the most common use of the sign types we talked about. So it's applicable to probably the majority of people viewing this today. So sign area is in B under section 18-184. A total limit of 2 square feet of sign area is permitted for each linear foot of commercial or industrial building frontage. I always compare this to kind of those word problems you had to do in grade school. So we need a little bit of data to find out how much signage area you're allowed. So in this case, we're going to presume that the sample building that I have on the screen here is 20 feet in width. So based on that, if we double that, they're allowed 40 square feet of sign area. So when an application is brought to the town of Vienna, they're going to provide us with the height and the width of that sign and the width of their leased area or their business. In this case, we're going to say this is in a shopping center. So they've got a 20-foot wide leased area for their business. It is based on that business's width. If the building is shared by multiple tenants, as many of our shopping centers are, you are only allowed the sign area for your width of building. If you do use more sign area than your width of building, someone else cannot come and use that. And that's the same for 2-story buildings in our current code. If it is a 2-story building, it is the width of the first floor is shared between the top and the bottom. So it's something that needs to be considered by landlords and tenants alike when they're proposing sign area. So in this case, the applicant told us that the sign was going to be 2.5 feet tall by 15 feet wide. And I have a little bit of a sample. The red, if you can see it, is the sign, the way we measure the sign area. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next. I've got another example that if someone chose to take that sign area and break it up on the front of the building, they would have a proposed sign. In this case, that proposed wall sign is only 2 by 9. So it's 18 square feet. And they want to add 2 different awning signs, one on the top of the awning and one on the valance. So we would take the area of all those signs proposed. Again, these all count towards your wall sign allowance. And that's 27 square feet. So they're still under the 40 square feet that's allowed by code. So measuring sign area. We measure sign area by a 4-sided shape around all of the sign's elements. This is one of the cases where I say it can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, how they measure sign area. In some jurisdictions, they would allow you to do an 8-sided shape or other to reduce what the sign area to be more concise with the shape of a sign if there was a logo. We do not allow that. Our zoning code does not have that definition at this time. So this is an example of a couple different kinds of wall signs that we'll see. As we've talked about a couple times, the awning sign, a flat panel wall sign. It does not have to be an internally illuminated sign, but all of the criteria we've talked about still count. Cabinet sign, and then a channel letter sign. So again, channel letter is individual letters. I'm going to go back to the Starbucks example that we had before. Individual letters and a logo that it's a 4-sided shape around all of those elements. It is not the area of each individual letter. So monument and freestanding signs. So this is one in still underneath the permitted signs in commercial and industrial zones. There are separate conditions for sign area or sign allowance for monument and freestanding signs. If you remember, in the definition, the monument sign had a limit on the height. So that's an added criteria that we're going to need for freestanding and monument signs, is to be provided the total height of the sign. So, and then when we're talking about pole signs, which we do allow, pylon signs or pole signs are sometimes called, the bottom of the sign shall not be less than 9 feet above the average grade at its base. So, however, it's conditioned, it can be lower if it's in a landscape strip, which many of them are in town. So you do see varied heights on those. And then the last sentence in this is kind of where the base information we need for almost all freestanding signs is: one freestanding sign not to exceed 36 square feet in area shall be permitted for each separate building or buildings in a commercial industrial zone, except shopping centers. They have their own criteria in another code section. But this is where we need the number of signs, the location, the area, and the height. So here's some examples of freestanding signs. There's a couple. There is the box around the sign area showing you what you're considering your sign area. So that's the all messages, logos, and the backing behind that. And then there is the height of the base of the sign and the height of the total sign. So these would be all measurements that we would require on submissions for signs to determine if they met the zoning code. In addition, for a freestanding sign, you would have to give us a site plan. I don't have an example of one of them today. We get a wide variety of site plans, but a plat, survey, or approved site plan is the best documentation to show us to scale, measured precisely where the base of a freestanding sign is going to go and how much it would protrude or be close to the property line, things of that nature. So after we've determined that these signs that are proposed for a specific property or business meet the zoning code, the next step is to go before the Board of Architectural Review. The Board of Architectural Review, I have here some of the code sections that show kind of when the Board of Architectural Review is required. Essentially everything except for single family dwellings requires Board of Architectural Review. So if you're a church or a school in an RS10, which is a residential zoning district, you still require Board of Architectural Review. So in addition, we always recommend for anyone applying for signs to review the Board of Architectural Review design criteria. I don't have them listed here because it would just be more text than we want for a presentation of this format, but there is a link that will be included in the PowerPoint, and you can check out Chapter 4 of the Town Code at any time. One thing that the Board of Architectural Review looks at that has become more important recently is sign illumination. Sign illumination is not codified in the town of Vienna, but is part of the Board of Architectural Review's purview as far as its character and blending with surrounding buildings and environments and landscapes. So for each application of a sign, we ask for the lumens and kelvins of that sign. This became even more important when LED became the more popular illumination method for signs. As you can see at the top, with a 255 lumen light output versus a 4 lumens, the brightness of that sign is going to vary. Probably the signs that the board has preferred are the ones that appear to be between 100 and 150 lumens. Along with lumens, there is the color temperature. So that is how natural or blue the light looks. So these two things combined can change the character of a sign. And so this is information that is very important. We will work with applicants frequently to get this information and to work with their sign, whoever's constructing the sign, for them to get this information based on their lumen modules and things of that nature. But it is something that we do consider at the town of Vienna at the Board of Architectural Review level. Some jurisdictions do have codified restrictions on lumens and kelvins. So all of our applications for signs, again, I'm going to promote IDT plans. The Board of Architectural Review application is here, and if you need an application for a sign outside of the Board of Architectural Review, which there's some conditions, there's the commercial building permit. So, and I want to talk a little bit about temporary signs before I close out. we have allowances for banners and temporary signs that are not the flag signs. Those are prohibited in town. If you do display them, our zoning compliance officer may visit your business and ask you to remove them. Then we also have in our residential districts yard signs. So those are permitted. This example is of a cart similar to some businesses that are operating in town. And we do allow a maximum square footage of temporary signage in businesses or in residential districts. So just remind that right now, what the definition of temporary signs, there are many of the temporary sign types are prohibited. Banners are permitted, and I apologize, I missed the maximum square footage, and I will have to look for that. And to be displayed they can be displayed for up to 180 days. We do have a current zoning administrator determination that allows that. However, during COVID, we have been allowing temporary signs to assist businesses in promoting their curbside dining, pickup, give customers more information. And this is currently something that the council and planning commission are working on text amendments to change our temporary sign ordinance. So, and again, prohibited signs, moving signs, pennants, and flag signs. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And just if you can go back 2 more slides, the maximum size for the banners is 120 square feet.
Thank you.
And that is on our website about planning and zoning, about the temporary waiving of temporary sign. The town temporarily waives temporary sign permit fees. There are no fees for these applications as well.
And we are not waiving signs because that's not allowed. Those are moving signs.
We're waiving the fees in the application.
Yes,
yeah. So following those criteria, you're welcome to use the signs.
Yes.
Okay, so with that, I do not see any questions and answers. Questions. I don't see any questions in the box at the moment. Does anybody online have anything that they would like to ask about signs? If nothing comes to mind right away, that's fine. We welcome any emails to codecreate@viennava.gov. Always happy to answer questions, get you through the IDT process. We know that there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to selecting your signs, the color, the size, the location. That can be a little daunting at first. So we are here to help. And oh yes, thank you, Andrea. And since we don't have any questions, I just want to take this moment to plug our next Lunch and Learn series. So December 4th, we'll have working from home. So again, for any businesses, especially with this pandemic, people who have decided to take the plunge and start a home business, we'll have Jennifer Murphy from our department giving us a nice conversation back and forth about what the steps are to start your business at home, what permits you need, and any approvals for that. And then December 18th, we will have Table for Two, a discussion on outdoor dining. And that will get into more about what are the steps under our current code to get approved for outdoor dining, how that's changed during the pandemic. And then also, we'd love to have a conversation about what people would like to see that process be as we're updating the code. So in the same vein, if there's anything that businesses would like to see changed in our sign code, we would love to hear that as well. So that's really the point of this, is to have the discussion about what our code allows now and find out what's working or not working, or what you'd like to see changed. Because again, as we've said a million times, this code is from the 50s and 60s, and we're trying to bring it up to current standards and make sure that it works for everyone in town. So I still see no questions. That means you answered all the questions. You did it perfectly.
I think I covered everything.
Great. Okay, well then this is a short one. Everyone gets to have the rest half of their hour to enjoy lunch.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.